various people across the grand spectrums of time and the multiverse. You know who I am. So I want to talk about pragmatism, because I feel like it's good to put across sort of my perspective on this, because some people, I think, well, it's kind of difficult to know, because my commenters make up people who are variously trying to troll me and provoke a reaction, people who are in their own personal sort of ongoing argument with me, an attempt to sway me to their political beliefs, and that they think that they are scoring points against me. And there are also people who just leave sincere comments or do memes. So it's sometimes hard to know how to respond to a particular comment, because it's like, okay, is this a troll? Is this someone who is trying to score points? Is this someone who's just doing a meme? Or is this someone being legitimate? And of course, it's entirely possible that someone is doing all four of those things at once. So I'm going to kind of talk about this thing, just sort of give my perspective, and to kind of, I suppose, cover my bases with regards to responding to this sort of stuff. Because, to be honest, I don't give a shit what the trolls think, and I don't give a shit what the point scorers think, and I don't really give a shit what the memers think. But if there are people who are genuinely confused by this, or genuinely have points to make, I mean, you can make a political point and be genuinely open to stuff, but so it's just because it's a politically motivated comment doesn't necessarily mean that these are people who are never going to be swayed round. It's worth kind of giving this sort of breakdown of pragmatism. So pragmatism, sort of the definition we're going for, is the idea that sometimes you engage in activities that you would maybe rather not do, would maybe not be seen as good actions to perform, because they, by being performed, gain you a very practical advantage. Okay, and the key example for me, a key case of pragmatism for me, is the idea of the European Union, which is that the European Union has problems. It has an awful fucking lot of problems. But as we are witnessing from even just the decision by the public that they would ever so slightly like Brexit, right? Okay, it's ever so slightly like Brexit that a lot of people think means, well, Brexit is gonna happen now, right? That decision, even that alone, that thing that could easily be flip-flopped on, that could easily be spun around, that, you know, the Parliament could block, that even if it happened, it could happen in such a way that we're basically still in the European Union anyway, even that has basically caused the economy to go to complete shit. And it was pretty much in complete shit before anyway. So it's like we were scum of the earth before, and now we're like even scummier. So So things aren't good, basically, because of leaving the European Union. We haven't even left it yet. This is the thing: is that, you know, the private eye did an interesting short little article where apparently a government body had found out that, well, there haven't been many negative consequences for the economy about Brexit. Yes, because it hasn't fucking happened yet. Right? We have seen genuinely terrifying things happening to the economy, and this is just the tip of the fucking iceberg. This isn't even the tip of the iceberg, because we haven't seen the iceberg yet. What this is just a little dusting of snow that lets you know that, hey, there's a fucking iceberg nearby. Right? Like, this is just the forewarning of the shitberg to come. So, yes, you know, the European Union has problems. It does need to be radically reconstituted. And at the same time, right, I know that there are a good many people who are politically opposed to me on this. I don't care. Go fuck off and go jerk off to pictures of Hitler for all I give a shit about. Right? Second World War, generally regarded as a bad thing, right? Right? Generally, you know, Hitler conquering a load of countries, killing a load of Jews, generally regarded by people I give a shit about as a bad thing. Because the people who don't regard it as a bad thing would be the fucking Nazi fuckers who I don't care about. So in the Second World War, what we essentially witnessed was right-wing xenophobia and fascism taken to such an extreme that the entire world went to war to kind of stop it. And the thing is, we were kind of fortunate in a sense that this example of utter horror perpetrated by right-wing fascism happened under the mantle of such a very stupid and insane man. Because at the beginning, Hitler and Stalin had a kind of pact. And I don't know if you know much about the Second World War, but basically, whilst Britain, you know, nobly did its part that we keep harping on about, basically the Russians were the reasons the Germans were kept so very busy, and the Russians basically won the Second World War with a bit of help from us lot, and the only reason they got into the war was because Hitler decided to pick a fight. That could easily have gone a very different way had Hitler been a little bit saner and a little bit smarter. And almost the dangerous thing about what we're witnessing in America at the moment with Donald Trump is the one thing I keep saying to kind of point out that, hey, we don't have to worry about Trump is, well, he's probably not as stupid and mad as we think he is. Which, as I just kind of explained about Hitler, maybe isn't such a good thing. So, there are already practical upshots of talking about history in this regard. And after the Second World War, because it was generally regarded as such a bad thing, a lot of countries decided to work together to make sure that nothing like that could ever happen again. And essentially, the European Union is part of that. the idea is that essentially you have open borders so that everybody can have friends in different countries, can work in different countries, so that you kind of move past the borders and you have friends all over the place. So there is a much more cultural idea against war, right? That you break down nationalism, because nationalism is what caused this, right? And you make it into a democratic place whereby everybody has got ties to everywhere, and so they aren't gonna devolve into nationalistic fervor. And that's what we're witnessing now, is we're witnessing essentially a nationalistic fervor taking hold of Europe again. And one of the big signs of danger is that all these nationalistic countries are saying, we want to pull up the drawbridges, we want to stop doing open borders. Which is basically saying, hey, you know, all of those different ties we have to make sure everybody knows everyone and everybody's friends with everyone, we want to fucking cut them. We want to make it so that a Second World War could happen again. And there are, to a certain extent, right, what is happening with regards to Britain is harmless, right? Because what we've essentially done for ourselves is make ourselves even more insignificant to the global stage. Although we have sent a message, and that message is that the European Union is weak, that it can be left by major players, and that as a result, maybe it's time for these countries with right-wing nationalistic movements to stop pulling punches and start making demands for control of borders, to cut those ties that prevent things like Second World War happening again. The European Union has a lot of problems, and it drastically needs reformation to ensure that it becomes more open, more democratic, more socialist. Not national socialist, because not nationalistic. Nationalistic is a very, very bad idea. And I know a lot of my viewers think very differently, and I honestly don't give a shit. You think differently. Fuck you. That's gonna be a soundbite. And we see another case of pragmatism with regards to what is happening in America. I don't like Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is a warmonger. She is a liar. She is establishment. She is privileged as fuck. And she has enacted bills in the past. She has used rhetoric in the past that is racist and dodgy and generally dangerous. The thing is that for whatever reason, she is now basically the only viable candidate to stand opposed to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is essentially the in terms of the Marxist theory of history, like there is this idea that you know, in the past there was this idea of the great man theory of history, that, you know, these great men like Julius Caesar and Napoleon, they rose up and they set fire to history, and they conquered all these places and they changed the world, right? Well, a sort of Marxist theory of history is just like, no, what happens is that all these complicated factors like sociological issues combine together so that there is a need. There is a need for someone to rise up, so that there is a void that someone who is charismatic and someone who can take advantage in all these different ways can step forward into the void and ride this wave of anger, this wave of desire for change. And Donald Trump is the man riding this wave of nationalism, riding this wave of backlash against the lefty, Ponzi, socialist fucking elite. Donald Trump is, in many ways, I suppose, to the far right and the alt-right, a pragmatic decision as well. Because the far right and the alt-right is generally to be sort of, to be, I suppose, nice. I can't really think of a better term, because it's not really fair, because as far as I'm concerned, fair isn't what I'm talking about here, but I suppose to be a nice interpretation of the sort of far right and the alt right is that these are essentially the put upon working classes, the put upon country folk or whatever, who are sort of left behind. You know, they see London, you know, or they see New York, and they see all these places with all these rich, lefty, liberal people, and they're left out in the cold, and pretty much all they've got is religion, and they're just bitter and full of hate, and they see these, you know, lefty people who they don't understand because they're moving at 1,000 miles an hour, whilst as far as, you know, these good, solid, working class people are concerned, their lives are much slower, much more sedate, and they don't notice. They can't keep up with this constant change, and they see this barrage of ideas and ideologies attacking everything they know and love. And so they're angry. They're angry, and opportunistic cunts are using this anger for their own ends, and they are using it to win elections, to sell newspapers, to make money off this hatred, right? And so in the process of which they are fostering more and more of this hatred and animosity and say, no, hate these people because it will make me money, because it will get me votes. And as a result, they've kind of created a culture of xenophobia, a culture of bigotry, a culture of blaming the other. And essentially what Trump has done is caused the Republican Party to freak the fuck out, because this is Frankenstein's monster come to life as far as they are concerned, right? They have been pumping racial fucking hatred into these poor working class communities for so long, because the Republican Party, the Conservative Party, these are parties founded by the elite. These are parties run by the elite. These are parties whose policies are all about destroying everything that would benefit the working class. So how do they get into power? They lie to stupid people. they lie and they manipulate and they say, hey, vote for me and I will save you, because they make things simple instead of telling an unglamorous tale of, yes, well, you know, the way we're going to get us out of this recession is we're going to stimulate economic growth through benefiting the welfare state. What they do is they say, no, we have to tighten our belts, because it's exactly like your own personal budgeting. Because you see, you could be Chancellor of the Exchequer because you clearly know enough about how to do basic maths to run the country. And they say that, well, you know, wars are just like fighting bugs. You've just got to squish them enough, and then they'll all stop being a problem. And the reason that the country's in a state isn't because, you know, the economy's in the shit, that the austerity doesn't work, that the globalization has made it so that companies could go overseas to hire poor slave labor in, you know, different countries. They don't talk about how actually it's to do with slackening of labor laws that are meaning that people are working harder and longer for less pay, that essentially pay hasn't kept up with inflation, and the cost of living is rising whilst the state of pay is staying the same, or it's not rising up enough. And there is this desire by overseas investors and to make money off exploiting the high cost of things, so they get more and more expensive needlessly, and overseas investors, blah 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 blah. They don't talk about all of that. They just say, look, brown people, they're gonna rape your kids, because that's an easy narrative to understand, right? If you are someone from a poor community who's working all fucking day in the fucking fields, you don't have time to understand the latest fucking, you know, protocols on how to treat women, the latest protocols on you know what this ethnic community is called, and what their culture is like, and what this new gender identity and sexuality is. You don't have time to learn about how actually the tax code works, about how actually you know, science and fucking genetics work. You don't have time to learn about, you know, things like cultural diversity and how actually austerity and the economy really works. You just want to go home and just have a nice cup of coffee. I was gonna say tea, and then I remembered it was America. You just want to go home, have a nice cup of coffee, have a beer, and jerk off. You don't want to fuck around with any of this stuff. So when it comes time to do your duty, to cast your vote, you don't want somebody coming over saying, well, you know, actually the problems of this country are all incredibly complicated. What you want is someone to say, yeah, the problem of this country is this thing, and we can sort it in this way. And you don't want the problem to be some grand, long speech about, well, you know, there's this and that, and all these things that are interrelating this way and that way, and they all make each other worse. You just want someone to say, it's these people. And you don't want a solution that's going to be like, well, what we're going to do is we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and then these things will help these things, and these things will help these things, and therefore these things will stop exaggerating each other, and therefore things will stop being a problem over time. You just want someone to say, we're gonna do more of it, or we're gonna do less of it. You just want something nice and simple to understand, because you don't have the time, right? And if all you've ever known is this culture that has been speaking to you in this way, that has, you know, raised you to think in this way, that has been exploiting you thinking in this way, then you don't believe that anybody could think differently. And so you hate Trump because Trump is everything that you despise. Because Trump is Wall Street. Trump Trump married an immigrant who worked illegally. Because Trump is a creepy ass motherfucker. You hate him. But at the same time, voting for him is pragmatic for you because he talks politics as simple as you. Because his idea to fix the country is to get rid of people. It is simple. How do we solve all the rampant problems in America? Well, we get rid of the bad people. Who are the bad people? Well, they're easily identified by a skin colour and a cultural identity. Okay, how are you going to get rid of them? Well, we're going to build a wall. How are you going to pay for that wall? We're going to make the people we don't want to come into our country pay for it. How are you going to do that? It's a simple narrative. It's a very, very simple narrative that is very easy to understand, and that is oh so seductive. Right? I can understand that. I don't like it, but I can understand it. It's like, I mean, I've talked before about how I essentially am at this point stuck in this ongoing war with myself about a mistake I made some time ago that caused some backlash, and about how I am constantly, in my mind, there is a part of my brain that's constantly going back and forth over this issue. And it's such a nice idea to just say, you know what? No, they're bad people. They're bad people, and if they're annoyed and if they're angry, fuck them, because they're bad people. So simple. So simple. But life isn't simple. Life isn't simple. The problems of the world are not just one skin colour, are not just one culture, are not just any individual ethnic minority. I mean, to a certain extent, this is where the whole bullshit about the cis white male comes from, right? This is why the right wing latches onto the idea of white male, cis white male, because to them, they can't understand actually feminism is this grand thing that encompasses many different movements of many different kinds of people, and that they all have different kind of ideas and beliefs, and that they each have different theories and understandings of how these problems came about. All the idea that, you know, the suffragettes had to cause a nuisance in order to get the vote, the idea that there are academic feminists who are debating back and forth about the stuff, that language is constantly evolving, that they're not annoyed about this thing because this thing itself, it's all misogynist. What they're annoyed about is that this thing is part of a symbol of a wider problem that causes women to be treated in a certain way, to be viewed in a certain way, which therefore enables horrible things to happen to them, which therefore is part of a misogynistic movement. Like they can't understand that, so they simplify it down to these people called these things hate these other people because they look like this and they think this, right? Instead of it being that feminists are all these different subsets of people who think these different ways about all these different subtle issues, they distill it down to them feminazis don't like the white men. And again, right, that's a horrific simplification, and yet I can understand. I don't like it, but I can understand why that simplification happens, because in my own self-loathing, I find that happening. Because the idea that, you know, that the people don't like me is because actually I write creepy ass stuff, and that, you know, I can be quite an arrogant son of a bitch, and I can be interrupting and rude and all these different things, right? No, it's just because of the color of my skin. That's why they don't like me. It's because I've got a cock. That's why they don't like me, right? It's simple. It's a very simple thing, and simple things are seductive to the brain that is constantly overworking itself, to a body that is drained. Because this is the thing, is that, you know, the right wing, you know, there is this idea the right wing has, and it's a very simple idea, which is that you just the way you get better at something is you just try harder. Just try harder, right? You know, I mean, it's, I suppose to a certain extent it's in bloody, you know, George Lucas's Star Wars, you know, do or do not, there is no try. But, you know, the idea that, you know, the reason you're not getting a job is you're just not trying hard enough. The reason you don't have a girlfriend is you're just not applying yourself hard enough. You know, never mind, these things are complicated factors, right? You know, getting a job is like, well, you know, what school did you go to? What university did you go to? What course did you study? Do you have any disabilities? And how do you look? And also then, you know, what kind of things do the person who is interviewing think? What kind of things do the company you're working at feel like? You know, like, all these different things are complicated factors, and then are influenced by how much money is going into the economy of the country you're applying for work in, and, you know, how much money is the company making, and, you know, how many positions are opening up, and all these are complicated things. So again, the right wing, far right movement distills it down to a very simplistic idea of not trying hard enough. And I think that this is why they have such an addiction to simplisticness, because just trying harder, takes willpower, and willpower takes energy. And it might not take as much energy as you know, say, ploughing a field, but these are both activities that, to a certain extent, the human body has a finite amount of per day. Right? You only have so much energy to put into doing manual labor, and you only have so much energy to put into thinking about things. So if you are working in a town where you have a very hard labor kind of job, your brain, your body is tired, so your brain does not have that much energy left over to think about things. And it's not saying that, you know, people who go to the gym are thick. It's just that if you're physically tired, you're gonna struggle to, you know, solve a mathematical equation, right? It's just a case of things take energy, right? You know, your brain is part of your body, and therefore your brain thinking through stuff takes energy. And if you are already knackered out from working in the fields, you're not gonna have much energy left over for thinking through, okay, how do I talk to this person? Okay, how do I understand the shit this person has been through? How do I understand gender identity? How do I understand politics? How do I understand economics? How do I understand austerity? How do I understand that all these things are interrelated within the person that I am talking to? No! Simple. You just distill it down to, no, this person is this way and this person is this way, and I just do this and I just do that and I just do this, and it's all very, very simple because you're tired, because your brain doesn't have the energy left to think through this shit. And the more you don't think through this shit, the more you don't exercise your brain in terms of its thinking capacity, the more that part of your brain sort of subsides, right? Like, the brain is a muscle, and like any muscle, the more you work it, the stronger it gets, the better it gets, you know. And it's like anything, you know. The best way to get better at something is to slowly and comfortably do a little bit of it every day, and over time you'll just get better and better and better and better and better until one day you really are a lot better. And the reverse is also true, right? And so I think this is how we end up in this very complicated and sort of disparate set of worldviews, is that you have this community of people who genuinely are good, honest, hard-working people, but because they are so hard-working, they don't have time left over to necessarily think long and hard about things. And cynical bastards who are opportunistic and just trying to make the most money understand this, and they take advantage of this, and so they exploit this. And so you have people who don't have the energy to properly think through things, being fed this consistently simplistic narrative time and time again until it is all they know. Until for them, anything that doesn't fit this simplistic narrative seems utterly insane, whilst at the same time you have people in the city who are kind of doing the opposite, right? Like, in the city, you know, yeah, you've got people who are working incredibly, you know, tough jobs, you know, like, there are people, you know, who clean the streets, who work the sewers, who do sort of waiter jobs, who do shitty minimum wage work that is physically hard. But also that these people tend to be engaging in a culture that is just passively much more complicated. And so because of that, their brains are constantly getting worked and worked and worked and worked. And so they are better able to think through this complicated stuff, and they are in a position whereby they are not being fed the same simplistic narrative, right? Their brains are being exercised to the point where they don't buy the simplistic narrative, so they go in search of a more complex narrative, and they get fed this more complex narrative, and this more complex narrative tends to be a more left-wing narrative, because it's quite hard to tell a complex right-wing narrative, right? Unless you go down the sort of conspiracy route. And kind of the more you know, the more you are exercising your brain, generally the more energy, the better a brain you have to realize, oh right, conspiracy theories, generally speaking, aren't exactly true. I think even the far right and the alt-right would agree that conspiracy theories aren't generally true. So, like, and so therefore, people in the city who are exercising their brains and their sort of their mental willpower more, who are searching out for more complex narratives, who are being fed more complex narratives, are more drawn to the left wing. And so essentially, and then the internet sort of reinforces this difference. So you have the sort of these people who, when they get tired, they just want to relax in a place where they feel safe, and where they feel safe is the place where they get fed the narrative that they are used to. So the left wing get this complicated narrative reinforced and reinforced and reinforced, and the right wing get this incredibly simplistic narrative reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. And it's kind of, on the internet, passively done. We sort of choose to do it ourselves. I mean, for God's sake, I'm doing this now, where I'm basically playing whack-a-mole with right wingers, and it's just like, you are following me, and I see that you have a bloody Pepe in your Twitter icon, and that your username is something fascist. Then block, and we end up sort of not creating echo chambers, because an echo chamber, right? The echoes die. What we are doing is we are constantly reminding ourselves of the kinds of narratives that we are used to. And so therefore these opposing narratives seem utterly impossible. And because they seem utterly fucking impossible to us, we want to find a way to destroy them. And the thing is that the left wing, because of this, complex narrative that they are far more used to engaging, they can reach out, they can see the other side, and they can reach out and they can understand the other person's point of view, because they've been exercising their brains in this way, and they can as a result kind of understand and try to come to an understanding, and then think through logically, moves ahead, and they can think through pragmatically of, yes, I don't like this, but I understand that these people, if this happens, will cause a lot of negative consequences in this way and this way and this way. So while I don't like this person for this way and this way and this way and this way and that way, I would rather vote for them because it will prevent this and this, which will be worse in this way and this way and that way. And so therefore the left wing are more likely to vote for more right-wing candidates. They are more likely to vote for candidates that are outside their personal political belief system, and they're more likely to back institutions that their political beliefs wouldn't necessarily prefer, because they can understand the pragmatic need, they can understand the consequences beyond a very simplistic, I like this, I don't like this. Whereas at the same time, you have the right wing, the far right, the alt-right, who are spending their times because of their simplistic narratives that they have been fed, that they are to a certain extent. Okay, how to say this without sounding like a complete megadouche? These narratives that they, to a certain extent, find easier to comprehend because they don't have as much energy to think through this stuff, because they typically have such harder lives, and lives that keep getting harder and harder because they have been fed this narrative and they have got this lifestyle, and so they don't have the energy to think through this stuff. And so you end up in this sort of self-repeating cycle whereby these people with this simplistic narrative end up voting for people who reinforce this simplistic narrative, and these people typically are people who will shaft them and make their lives harder and harder and harder, so they end up being more and more overworked, so they end up having less and less time to think through this stuff, and less and less energy to be able to think through this stuff with, and so therefore they feel more and more inclined to simplistic narratives. And because they feel more and more inclined to simplistic narratives, they end up in this position whereby they can't comprehend that someone else might think differently. They can't comprehend that someone else can see what they think, can understand what they think, and still think they're wrong. You know, this whole idea of red pilling, this idea that somehow the knowledge will awaken you and you will wake up to the fact that the world is exactly what the people you think differently to think, right? The idea of the red pill is this idea that, you know, the world is not as we realize, and that if you just understand, then you will see how the world really is, and you will wake up and notice, and you will think completely differently. And the thing is that among the left wing, right, like, yeah, you could imagine this idea of a right wing person, you know, say they stop doing such a physically arduous job, but you know, they get a lot of time to relax, and they get a lot of, you know, they subtly, they have a sort of lifestyle which subtly, you know, gets their brain used to complexity, and then, you know, subtly start feeding in complex narratives. And you know, you begin with fiction, you begin with ways that aren't gonna make them question their beliefs, and maybe over time they might, you know, realize the world is more complicated than it really is, but that isn't gonna change that they have been brought up this way, that they have this different perspective, right? You know, that even if you are a left-wing person who considers that, you know, there are right-wing people who are just too overworked, who have been fed this narrative so long, and that if they stopped working so hard and they actually, you know, exercise their brains, they might be able to see that the world is a lot more complex than that, as has happened, you'll still be able to understand that it's not as simple as that, right? That you don't just sort of, you know, you don't turn the world into a grand left-wing socialist utopia by just giving everyone good paid holidays, right? No, it's not as simple as giving everyone good paid holidays and, you know, good education, because it's also about culture. It's also about, you know, nature and nurture, and the fact that these people have been led to think this way all their lives, and that's not just going to disappear overnight. Their brain may be able to think more complex narratives, but if all they are used to is these political points of view, that isn't going to disappear overnight. But if you are someone who has been who has this idea of a very simple narrative, then yeah, you do think that you can convince people to your way, to your belief system by showing them the facts. You think that all it takes is the right argument, that all it takes is the right knowledge to be shown, and someone will see the light. because that's simple. Because if all you know is a simplistic narrative, then you're gonna see simplistic things everywhere, and you're gonna assume those simplistic things are the right things. I mean, Occam's razor is actually a kind of very complicated thing to remind complicated-minded people, hey, sometimes simple is actually the case, right? And to a certain extent, this is how sort of some people can end up, missing things that are right in front of them, because we expect a more complicated thing in the world, and so we can't always notice that, oh yeah, it's right where I left it, right? We're so used to something being harder that it being easy comes as a surprise. And I've kind of went on a massive fucking tangent there. Massive fucking tangent. So I think it's a good tangent. I think it's a worthy tangent. But yeah. I think what I essentially did there was call all the right wingers simple. Sorry about that. That is ironically a very simplistic thing to say. Of course, I wasn't actually saying that, but again, I suppose if one has a simplistic view of the world, then they will distill, an hour of complex interrelated things into, well, the autistic lefty said that all right-wing people are simple. And so, kind of to conclude, because of this, right-wingers just see the world would be better if simple things were done. The world is problematic because foreigners are coming over into our country and they're doing things, and we don't like foreigners doing things because it means that our people can't do those things. And that all these people from overseas, they're inferior to us because they're different, and they're worse than us because they're different, and that's a simplistic narrative, so that's what you think. And the idea that yes, what will make this problem so much easier is if we just close up the borders, because that can never in any way backfire, because electing a grand dictator and giving them the power to take away people's rights and decides where they can and cannot live, that's never gone wrong before in the past. That could never go wrong again. And so I suppose to them, they can't understand pragmatism because pragmatism is not simple. Pragmatism is kind of the epitome of not simple, because pragmatism is, look, I'm a nice guy. I think all the right things, and I'm gonna do this horrible thing because it's gonna give me an advantage, which will mean I can continue doing all the good things that I do, right? And that, to a simplistic narrative, is bad, right? You don't do that good, it's bad, right? And there is this perception well, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, they're just as bad as one another, and that if you hate the establishment, if you hate what Hillary Clinton stands for, therefore you should vote for Donald Trump because he's not Hillary Clinton, and so therefore you will be voting against Hillary Clinton if they're both as bad as one another, then you'll be sending a message and there'll be nothing wrong that will come from that. A very simplistic narrative, and a too simplistic narrative which ignores the reality of things. And it denies pragmatism, because pragmatism is not simple. Pragmatism is complicated. And that's why, for me, as someone who cares about democracy, right, like, again, this is an area of simplisticness, right? That people are like, well, if you care about democracy, you must pick. Do you want to have proportional representation, or will you be annoyed that Theresa May that Theresa May was elected without your say-so? Do you want to directly control who is going to be elected, or do you want proportional representation? You must choose! Because that's simple. The idea that someone can actually be in favour of one thing and also at the same time, if that thing does not happen, be in favour of this other thing happening because in that situation it is better, right? That's too complicated for these people, because what that is saying is, I have my preferred reality, then if I am presented with a version of reality I don't like, and I have a different set of options, I can still have an option I prefer in that reality than the other thing. And I suppose essentially that's what started this, hour-long ramble, is this idea that somehow I should be I should be ashamed of myself for having a problem with Theresa May being an unelected Prime Minister, and at the same time being in favour of proportional representation, and at the same time backing the European Union, because to a certain simplistic mind, to a mind that is used to very simplistic ways of seeing the world, I can only pick one. Whereas the reality is that, of course, I would prefer a European Union that was substantially better. But we don't have that. What we have is what we have. And given the alternatives to what we have, I would rather we had what we have now. I would rather that if we have to have first past the post, I would rather that we actually elected the leaders. I would rather that we elect the Prime Minister under first past the post if we have to have first past the post, right? I don't have a problem with sort of internal democracy if it's happening in opposition parties. It was sort of opposition parties deciding who's going to be their new leader through internal democracy. I don't have a problem with that when that is happening to parties that aren't in power. If the party is in power and they decide to change who is the leader of their party and therefore decide who is the Prime Minister, then under a system of first past the post, I would rather that the public as at large got a chance to decide who that new leader was going to be. And obviously At the same time, I would rather that we had proportional representation, because under proportional representation, whilst we would not necessarily get a chance to personally elect who would be the leader of this party, although I would argue there's no reason why we could not get a chance to elect who would be the leader, like say these political parties. The idea of proportional representation is that essentially you have the views of the country represented proportionally in terms of the MPs in Parliament, and so therefore you get the views of the country represented in Parliament, and so therefore if essentially you have a lot of different left-wing groups, a lot of different left-wing parties who combined their vote shares outnumber right-wing parties, then therefore their sort of MPs will outnumber the right-wing MPs, and therefore they can, through proportional representation, sort of form coalitions within that, well, not necessarily coalitions, but form kind of coalitions within that new parliamentary structure, which therefore means that the will of the people is represented, and therefore, whilst the left may be all these complicated subsets of things, they can work as one left-wing thing to fight and overrule the right. And equally vice versa, if the right wing were widely popular, but in smaller subsets of different things, then that would have control over the country, as opposed to larger parties that get less of the vote than compared to all these smaller parties that have combined a wider share. The idea is that the will of the country is represented through the MPs therein, and that therefore the will of the people is represented across the spectrums of politics, and not just in terms of which particular party got the largest slice of the cake. Because it's not so much about the individual party as it is about the will of the people being properly fucking represented. And the will of the people might be more properly represented, and I would argue it is more properly represented, by having all these different parties across the political spectrum, and how those different parties can work together or not work together depending on their political beliefs, as is synonymous with, as is the same with, people at large, right? That I may be in a different subset to, trans activists, for example, but I would still far rather fight for them than, I don't know, some moderate right-wingers. Because, the moderate right-wingers might be closer to my perspective, but or they might be more likely to vote for a political party that I might vote for, but I would be able to work with a party that was, this is given the terrifying view that I was, in politics. I would have a devastating career in politics, because my campaign would be immediately torpedoed. But I could work with someone whose political views, who had a political party that was very different to mine, that I personally would not vote for, if we were more politically aligned than someone who might have more of a... It's a complicated idea. But I think watch CGP Gray's video. CGP Gray explains proportional representation far simpler and uses graphics and stuff like that. Trying to explain why politically, though, proportional representation can better represent the will of the people than first past posts is kind of difficult when you're talking about sort of political wills and ethics and stuff like that. But suffice to say, right, pragmatism is understanding that you can do a bad thing in the name of a good thing, because whilst it might be a bit bad, it helps the good things, and the good things are more important than not doing the little bad thing. And that is why I can hold very different views, which to a simplistic mind might be very contradictory, because to a mind that can understand more complex things, they each are about choosing a more democratic, less damaging perspective. And yeah, pragmatism! Thank you to all my Patreons at patreon.com for helping to make videos like this possible. If you wish to leave a like or dislike to rate the video for my analytics, that would be much appreciated. Comments are always welcome, though be aware that they will be moderated before being published, so please be civil. If you liked this video, please consider adding it to your favourites, sharing it to your friends, or subscribing. If you wish to help me out or my channels, please consider whitelisting my videos in your adblock software, subscribing for monthly donations through Patreon, or giving a small one-off donation. Alternatively, I have a Steam wishlist for games I would consider let's playing or streaming, so if you would like to see me broken before the Dark Souls altar, or just happen to have gotten a duplicate of a game in a humble bundle, then you know what to do. I also have an official Facebook fan page, Twitter account, Tumblr, Reddit and blog, so you can stay up to date with all of my videos, blog articles and the things I care about. Links are in the video description. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I think that all that now needs to be said is ban all guns, institute universal basic income now, and ensure government is elected by proportional representation. Oh, and also, fuck the racists and fuck the alt-right. It is a reward for Patreons that who donate $5 or more, that they get thanks for donating $5 or more to my Patreon. And I haven't been doing that because I'm sort of shit at things, and so I am going to be thanking all the people who have donated $5 or more, basically for all time so far, and this is going to be re-recorded every time someone else donates $5 more in future. So anyway, without further ado, here we go. Thank you to Michael Hamilton Fletcher, who donated on September the 13th, 2015. And thank you to Marcus Anthony Infante, who pledged $5 on September the 3rd, 2016, and thank you to Henry Wotton, who pledged $5 on September the 8th, 2016. thank you to both of you, lovely, to all three of you, lovely people, and I will indeed be remembering to keep actually rewarding my Patreons for, you know, donating money to keep me alive, because that's nice, and because I have seen people complaining that, well, you know, this link to send you care packages from Amazon, all of the things on the wish list are really expensive. Yeah, well, you know, you can just give me money as well. That would be appreciated. So Patreons, thank you. You are lovely, wonderful. Apologies that you watch my videos, because I'm a sort of grotesque flesh golem of idiocy. Why? But anyway, thank you. Also, thanks to Martin Heavey, Cestrian vlogger, for pledging $5 a month on Patreon.